Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more turkey patterning, and today we've got another combo that one of you guys wanted to see, so I figured hey, we'll bring it out here and see what it can do, because it might give us some rather interesting results. But as for the shells we've got, I brought out some of the Herter Strutter turkey loads. They are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1.5 ounce payload of lead 5s, moving about 1260 feet per second. So we've got a 2 3/4 inch turkey shell today. Not something you see a whole ton of, especially when it comes to lead options anymore. Almost everything has gone to 3-inch by now, but these and our couple tests with them have been pretty solid performers. I mean, Herters in general, all of their turkey stuff is always pretty solid, and their lead options are pretty much just a reboxed Winchester Super X load. Herters is produced by Winchester for Cabela's and Bass Pro, so this is pretty well the exact same shell, just in a little bit different packaging. Either way, pretty interesting loading, but I think the big thing is going to come down to what can they do through today's choke combo. And as for today's setup, I brought out the Remington 1187. It's got a 28-inch barrel on it, and for the choke, we've got the Carlson's heavyweight TSS 640 constriction in here. It's definitely a pretty tight choke for a 12-gauge turkey option. 640 is usually more choke than what you really need. However, sometimes with these cheaper, more basic shells, they prefer to have a little more constriction. And one of you guys wanted to see a few of my more random shells that I've got in my cabinet, run through this 640 Carlson's to see what they could do. I don't know if a 2 3/4 inch lead 5 is going to be a good combo with this choke. It could very easily just blow our pattern all over the place and be too much constriction, but we'll see what happens. But as for today's test, everything is set up the same as usual. I've got the turkey target at 40 yards and the chrono so we can get our velocity. So let's get you guys a view of that target and see how the Herter's 2 3/4 5s can actually perform through this 640 Carlson's. I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but let's take our shot and see what we get. Alright, so that shell gave us 1366 through the chrono. Boss claim is only 1260, so we're 106 above that claim. Now, it's nothing unusual to see a little bit above their boss claim out of these shells. Low to mid 1300s is pretty usual, but is 1366 a little bit too much velocity for a lead 5, especially going through a 640? That I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, more than enough velocity, but how did they actually pattern down there at 40? Let's go check it out and see. Alright, so now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and I gotta say, looks pretty impressive. Now, right off the bat, I am still testing these different turkey targets. So far, they seem pretty mediocre, kind of just like the Birchwood Casey's are, to be honest with you. They halfway flake off, but nothing impressive. So I'll take a quick pause and touch this up with the paint marker so you guys can actually see what's going on, because I think it looks pretty impressive. Alright, that should be a little bit better for you guys to actually see on camera. And yeah, I gotta say, that is pretty nasty. For a 2 3/4 inch basic load of lead 5s going through a 640 choke, really can't argue with that kind of performance there. We are pretty much bang on right where we wanted to be on that turkey, and he is absolutely covered in pellets. Nowhere left or right, up or down he can move to and get away from you. That is absolutely a 40-yard capable pattern, and you could probably push that to 45 as well and still be perfectly fine, and maybe even 50. But I would highly suggest testing it on a piece of paper first so you know what the pattern looks like. Either way, what's on the actual turkey target is a pretty nice little pattern. For a $10 box of shells, I'll take that all day long. Around the edges, we did scatter stuff just a little bit. There's a few little flyers and straggly bits kind of just all around the edges here. So the very outskirts of the pattern are not anything super impressive to write home about, but I don't think that's too surprising. With that much constriction and that kind of a shell, being a lead 5, that's about what I expected to see around the edges. However, that middle 10 to 12 inches of that pattern is honestly a little better than what I was expecting to see. But this is a perfect example of what I always say when it comes to cheap shells. Sometimes the cheaper and more basic a shell is can lead it to perform a little bit better than you might expect through these tighter chokes. Now, these have always been a decent performing shell, but as far as the pattern that's on the turkey target, that's probably the best we've seen from them. I do think we've seen better around the edges through more open chokes, but that's not surprising. I think we probably just crossed over the edge of a little bit too much constriction for these. I do have a Remington 650 choke that we might need to try these through as well now and see what they can do, because that right there might be the ticket. It might be just enough choke to really get a nice core while not completely blowing the edges open either. But really, that's not a pattern that I would be scared to hunt with at all. I wouldn't hesitate to use that out there in the field. I would probably still be a little cautious if there was another bird close to him with those flyers and stuff around the edges, since I really don't want to take out more than one bird. But that is definitely a little bit better than what I was expecting to see. I kind of thought coming into it that it was probably gonna blow our pattern open a little bit more, considering they're a lead 5 in what is essentially a Winchester shell, and that's not really what we saw here. So overall, for a $10 box of 2 3/4 5s, that's not a bad combination. I think it worked out surprisingly well for us, and that's why we test as many different combos as we can, because sometimes these little bit more oddball combos can actually give you some rather impressive results. And here's the wad from that shell. If you've ever seen any of our other tests or tested a Winchester shell in general, this is just a Winchester wad. Same one they use in the Super X, Double X, and Longbeard loads. So nothing fancy or special to see. Nothing stuck down in there. No major damage, although there might be a little bit of snagging stuff up here at the very tip of the pedals. But that could have been just from the jump from the chamber to the bore, because that choke doesn't have any kind of porting or straight rifling or bands or rings or anything inside of it. But for a lead 5, going through a 640, really looks pretty good. Nothing that I'm concerned about here. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about that performance right there? I'm rather surprised and pretty impressed, all things considered. For a cheap shell through a tight choke, that could have been tremendously worse than what we saw there. And that is a very good turkey pattern. What's on the paper there is really pretty great. I mean, there's not really anything you can argue with there. Now, around the edges, I do think it shows signs of probably just creeping over the constriction that these are probably gonna like. That's why I mentioned maybe a 650 might be the key here. Touch less constriction while still potentially holding our core together like that. That definitely could be a pretty interesting test. Either way, I don't think there's really much to argue with there. That's easily 40 yard capable. You've got a nice core. You can reach it out a little bit farther than that if you needed to in a field or something like that. So ultimately, this is why I like to test some of these really tight chokes or a little bit more oddball combinations, because we can be surprised sometimes. And I think a lot of us are probably going to be pretty surprised to see that kind of a result from these shells and that choke combo. But leave all your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these Herter Strutter shells? And if so, what kind of results have you seen from them? Is that a pattern or a combo you would ever hunt with? Or would you prefer to see it a little bit tighter or a little more even around the edges, or even a little more open than that? And what other shells or choke combos do you want to see with either those Herter's 5s or that Carlson 640 choke? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, you have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All the information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.